Next week, we'll be discussing Princess Mononoke from 1997. Tom, how was your watch?
This is my first watch. I'm not very well versed in Studio Ghibli, and this might be only my fourth film from that production company. And I enjoyed it well enough. I have to say, of the four I've seen, The Flying Castle or House Flying Castle, Up on Poppy Hill, this, and Spirited Away, I still think actually Up on Poppy Hill is my favorite, and I'm probably an outlier in that regard just because that's the one realistic one and of the four I've seen, and I actually find it the most touching. Very often, I think in the other Studio Ghibli films, what happens is that these really intriguing fantasy elements or characters are introduced over and over and over again. We get more and more and more of them. And after a while, I sort of maybe disconnect from the plot a little bit. While with Up on Poppy Hill, I found the relationship between the male and female characters so intriguing that I was constantly staying with it, despite the fact that it's rather unusual in the fact that it doesn't employ fantasy tropes in any way. This film, I'm somewhat in between. I think what worked for me is that it had a kind of folktale sort of effect in the sense of the forest elements were the fantastical elements, and it had you can almost imagine a sort of Grimm's brothers sort of reality going on here, where the forest, or even a Greek myth reality, where the forest comes alive, or natural elements take on humanoid or humanistic forms in order to express something about the condition in which the forest is in, namely being overrun by these iron merchants. And for that reason, I think this ended up being my second favorite. I actually liked it a lot more than Spirited Away. And so that was my experience with this. I still found a lot of the Ghibli stuff. I will honestly say a little self-indulgent. I found that a lot in the case of Spirited Away and a little bit here. But what I did love about this movie was the incredible sympathy the filmmakers have for all the characters, even the characters who are damaging the environment, normally the bad guys, the Cruella de Vils of these types of works. However, here they're especially the main female character, who in the American version is voiced by Minnie Driver, has a deep investment in the people who she employs. And that made her much more sympathetic, and it made the film much less simple than I thought it was going for. And that's really what I enjoyed about it. Matt, how was your first watch?
I watched this movie probably around the time that it came out. It was one of my first exposures to Japanese animation that I really took to. I grew up around, mainstream anime of like Dragon Ball Z or I guess Pokemon towards the end there. But I didn't latch on to the anime aspect of it. I didn't really get into, I'm not into anime in that regard, but I have taken to the Studio Ghibli movies. And so I watched Princess Mononoke first, and then I've just enjoyed all of the work that that studio's put out. I actually am partial to Spirited Away, but I really enjoyed this one. And for some of the reasons you mentioned, Tom, I really liked that the the I guess bad characters you can't really consider bad because it's not as black and white as most animated movies that you get. There is some nuance and some complexities to everyone's living circumstances, which usually Studio Ghibli or at least Miyazaki introduces in his films. There's common common themes of environmentalism, um, war, all those themes that that make Miyazaki movies to me, that are just kind of they're involved somehow. um but I really liked this one. I like, as far as Miyazaki goes, the way that you're kind of immersed in the cultures that are introduced in those movies, and so you kind of feel like you're part of the town. There's sort of, they do some sweet stuff with scoring, and I don't know, it just makes for an intimate experience. And so as far as my experience with Princess Mononoke, I really I felt that with the cultures that they introduce here, as well as the forest. And yeah, I was all in at this point with Studio Ghibli. So I'm a fan of this movie and a fan of his other work. And I'd love to hear KJ your impressions of Princess Mononoke.
Yeah, just like you, Matt, this was my first Ghibli movie. I woke up one night, I was in middle school, maybe early high school, and Cartoon Network was actually pretty new at the time. And I had turned it on, and this movie came on in the middle. I had no idea what it was, but I was like, this is like nothing I've ever seen before. I don't know that I had seen any anime before Mononoke. And then my future wife, Rachel, who's been on the show, after college, we took a job teaching English over in Japan. So we took some Japanese lessons. And during the Japanese lessons, they put this movie on as an example of a movie to watch in Japanese with English subtitles to help learn the language. And it was that many years. I was like, oh, this was the movie I watched that night that was, that came on. So since then, I've been a huge Ghibli fan, gone through all their movies. But like Tom, I think I like their realistic ones more than the fantasy ones. So From Up on Poppy Hill is probably my favorite, although that's Hayao's son, Goro. And then The Wind Rises, I really liked. But yeah, and audience, as always with an animated film, I always recommend the first time you watch it, watch it in your native language. So for most of us in English audio, so that you get to see all the art. I wouldn't worry too much about the performances because it's not two competing performances. It's still just one performance over the art. So I would recommend watching that with the English audio. How about you, Nick? How was your watch?
This was my first watch of this film, and I finished it earlier today. So hopefully it'll be right in my mind for next week. Not too much of a lag time. Sometimes you get a few weeks in between and the details start to get fuzzy. I thought this was my second Studio Ghibli film, but after Tom's conversation, I forgot that From Up on Poppy Hill was also Studio Ghibli. I was just thinking of Spirit Away, which I thought was a very interesting film. I do think I lean towards the more fantastical, but I have a very limited audience or example of Studio Ghibli, so that may change. I did enjoy From Up on Poppy Hill as well, but specifically speaking about this film, one of the things that really jumped out at me was immediately the pace. Like you jump right into it. Like there's no like a background of this people or that. Is like boom, something's coming for us. We're under attack, and then the portrayal of violence or how the animation style portrays violent acts is very different than what the animation was that we grew up with dynamite and clouds and people falling off. It's just completely different style. I don't want to say realistic because it was over the top, but kind of jumped out at me. So that was one of the biggest things. I know that's like one element of a larger film here, but that was one that really jumped. Just how gross the demon was right from the beginning. Just everything right from the start. And then when he gets infected, and again, this isn't super spoilers, it's earlier in the film, and he just like starts shooting people's arms and heads off with arrows. I mean, it's just like, whoa. So there's a lot of other things going on in this film, but that really did jump out at me. The other, or I should say the last thing is, I questioned the title. Why is this Princess Mononoke, not Prince Ashitaka or something else, or the Spirit of the Forest? Why is that the title? But I guess we can get into that next week.
Princess Mononoke is available on HBO Max at the time of this recording.